Before I have anybody on the show, I ask them for their biggest cinematic influences. And you threw out Mr. Rogers and Stanley Kubrick. So tell me a little bit about those two influences, because when you think Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and you think The Shining and Lolita and Eyes Wide Shut and Full Metal Jacket, it tells you a lot about a person, I guess. So
Uh-huh.
let me know about those two kind of sides of you.
I mean, Mr. Rogers is the land of make-believe,
Hmm.
um, of childlike innocence, of imagination. Um, it connects to my childhood of just sitting on the floor of my room playing with G.I. Joes. I feel like that's the true core of my filmmaking. And just Mr. Rogers is so wholesome.
Right, right.
um, Kubrick is, I mean, obviously he's just like the master.
Yeah.
Him and Kurosawa. Gosh, I just love how each of Kubrick's films, how he plays around in different genres. How each film has like a really strong kind of like core idea, and that he's not necessarily interested in reality.
Right.
He is interested in like truth and the human experience,
Hmm.
but it's very much through some sort of stylized lens, with all his films.
Before we dive back into your story, I'm curious to know, like, there's always conversation about like who's the modern Kubrick, like who's the person who taps into that the most. And my gut feeling is always like there is no other Kubrick, like there's Kubrick and that's it. Do you feel like there's any filmmaker that is currently working you think really feels close to that, or like a spiritual successor to Kubrick, or do you stay out of that debate and discussion?
I mean, the nice way is that there is no other anything.
Right. Yeah.
We are all our own person who is a product of our own influences and our parents. Um, uh, I mean, and like, do comparisons like this help? Obviously, there's lots
Hmm.
of like what uh filmmaker it hasn't been touched by Kubrick, hasn't been
Sure.
influenced in some way. At least probably all the filmmakers I like, all the films that I like have probably been touched by Kubrick in some way.
Right.
I remember when Under the Skin came out that
Hmm.
people were really saying Glazer was like the new Kubrick, but it's just kind of
Yeah.
like whenever somebody does stuff that's like really formally rigid and has some like creepiness to it,
Yeah. That
with like
parallel gets
excellent,
drawn.
yeah, and with like excellently composed, 1 point perspective shots, like
Yeah.
all of a sudden we think Kubrick. He existed at the time that he did, obviously,
Hmm.
and he was making what he was making post like Spartacus. Like he had studio support, but at a totally different time when
Yeah.
everything was different.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see another Kubrick, nor should we, nor do we need to. He's still, a hugely influential person on, I think, on film for sure.
Yeah. Well, I love you hit the idea of like a big concept, but it's rooted in reality. So you mentioned like the make believe world of Mr. Rogers, which is, that same thing. It's rooted in there's real truths and lessons and stories that come out of it. And then you have this bigger make believe, or in Kubrick's case, a very high concept world. And that's something that I thought was really interesting about your film. Was I was watching it going, this could go very badly. When you have a big concept and a big idea, the thing that films tend to do that don't have massive budgets, I don't think you had $100 million budget, is they have this high concept and they stretch that budget or try to go into these crazy locations and this wild world. And your film's very, very grounded. And you always play within those boundaries that you have while also exploring this larger idea on the outside. And so going into Jethica, which we're here to talk about, like, tell me a little bit about like how that idea came about, and kind of the origins of that project.
Elena. Jessica? What are you doing here? Yeah, I'm on a road trip. Can't believe we haven't seen each other since high school. Are you okay?
I had a stalker.
What's his name? Kevin.
If you keep ignoring me like this, I'm not gonna take it easy when I see you.
Is there something you're not telling me? Jessica. Kevin is outside.
Jessica.
That's not Kevin.
It's Kevin. Jessica.
How is that not Kevin? Because Kevin is dead.
Where is Jessica?
You don't know where you are, do you?
I'm here for you, Jessica. I'm here for you now. I'm here for you forever. Jessica.
You are not crazy. This is happening.
I am here to help you forever and ever, Jessica.
Let's just give him what he wants. He wants you.
So much, Jessica. I want to be her. I want to kiss her. I want to love her. I want to tickle her. I want to see her calves and her legs and her thighs.
So how do I get rid of the ghost? I'm gonna take care of everything.
This specific idea for Jethica came from the location that I found on Airbnb. I had made a movie called Youngstown with some friends, one of which was Andy Faulkner, who is also an actor in Jethica. After making Youngstown, we were saying we should make another movie. And these movies that I've been making are made so small that you can kind of do whatever you want. And I mean, you can't do whatever you want. There's very little you can actually do. But like there's no reason to do it anywhere more than any other place.
Right.
So he was just like, what about New Mexico? I used to live there. It's really beautiful. And I thought that's as good of a reason as any to make a movie somewhere. And so I got on Airbnb and I took the price slider down as low as it can go. And I saw what places were on the map, what places were still available. And one of them was this trailer. And even the pictures on Airbnb were already insanely cinematic. So from those images, I started to imagine what movie would I make there? What story would be fun to tell with that location, with these actor friends that I already had in mind to work with. And that's where like the seeds of this came, combined with the fact that we were living in a pandemic. So the themes that we were all kind of dealing with were human connection, lack of human connection, isolation, self-isolation, all those just kind of like elements trickled down into the initial like foundation of what the film was going to become.
Yeah, that's interesting, starting with location. And I mean, obviously New Mexico is kind of a character in the movie, and the trailers as a character in the movie. So once you have the location, you've got the actors, like where did those roots of the story come into? You mentioned like obviously human connection and relationships, and some of which are probably very awkward in the film and, and things like that. But how did that kind of develop and continue growing into the story as we see it now?
So I had this little bit of an idea that there's a woman hiding out in this trailer. Also, it's not only super low budget movie, it's also made during the pandemic. So we're not wanting a bunch of people around, both because I'm not going to be able to pay them and because we don't all want to get COVID.
Two very good reasons to not have a lot of people.
And so, trying to let myself come up with a story, an idea that makes sense for a small amount of people. So a woman in this trailer who's hiding out for some reason. And then you're like, okay, what reason? This is almost like goes back to the Kubrick thing of it, of like not wanting to just be reality, of just real people living real lives. And it's New Mexico, so you can't do aliens. And I'd already done a robot movie. And so next up was maybe a ghost movie would be fun to do. So then you're doing a ghost movie. So now that's death. So, okay, now we got some death. How are these ghosts there? Who are the ghosts? Oh, maybe the thing she is hiding out from is that she killed somebody. So like just the way these kind of questions and answers almost answer themselves just by the circumstances of each step I'm taking forward, and arrived at just this basic kind of like story structure of a woman hiding out, a friend of hers from her past, from high school, reconnecting, liking the idea of it being these two women coming together to help each other out. And then this other woman also has something she needs some help with, also connected to death and themes of aloneness. And seeing the nice idea of it being a stalker, like just that also touches with all these themes. And so I kind of pitched roughly what I've just said to you, to each of the actors. Like, here's what I'm thinking. And then had a conversation with them about that. They responded to the things that they responded to. They shared thoughts about what they feel like their characters would be like. Oh, I feel like Callie was very much talking about how after experiencing something really traumatic that she feels like her character would almost be dead too, would just be like so closed off because she's like been through stuff.
Yeah.
Which also parallels what Ashley's character was. And so from those conversations with the actors, I then fed that kind of like back into the story machine and made a outline of half of the movie, of the first half, kind of leading up until everyone's at the trailer. And that's what we went to New Mexico with.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed like in the credits, like almost everyone in the cast is credited as writer.
Yeah, everyone.
You're playing a lot of different roles here. And I guess this goes down to just like the practicality of doing this. Like when you have 2 people in a room, disagreements happen. When you get like 6 people in a room, like there can be disagreements, especially all artists who are all thinking about different things. Like what's some advice or some thoughts you'd have as far as working with a group of people where you are developing the story together versus it would have probably been easier for you to say, here it is, this is what we're doing, are you in or out? You know, how did you kind of navigate that collaborative effort?
The big overarching thing about the project was that they were doing this for the fun of it, for the enjoyment of it, that actually isn't even about making a movie. I literally said to the actors, if at the end of these 2.5 weeks we haven't shot a thing, that's okay, as long as we feel like we've had a meaningful experience.
Yeah.
So that takes tons of pressure off the process, and it allows us to disconnect from almost any expectations. If I had written some script and said, I want to hear these words said, then I have expectations about what's going to be said, and then would be kind of maybe controlling, and that would kind of like lead to potential disagreements about whatever. So a big part of it is kind of letting go, you know, let Jesus take the wheel, as some religious people say. And then, of course, having collaborators who trust each other and trust you, especially when you're even though I'm collaborating with these people, and for this movie, I'm the whole crew, and it's just me and the actors. So there isn't a lot of people, but on many movies, you're collaborating with every part of the project, right?
Yeah.
So you got to have trust. That's a huge thing. I'm also very clear that it's like our movie, but I'm driving. You know, I guess I said Jesus takes the wheel, but really, like, I'm driving.
That's a little Freudian slip, huh? Jesus take the wheel. I'm driving, of course.
Right. Did I say that? That like it's all gonna get filtered through me. Like, I'm the director. I started this idea. I will finish it. It's all gonna come through me. But I also have wide open ears, and the second somebody says an idea that's better than mine, I'm happy to hear it. And then the other big thing is trusting your own intuition and encouraging others to do that as well. I think that helps to make things not ever personal or like less personal. It's not about you or me. It's actually just about the movie. Like, I'm just trying to listen to what the movie wants to be, and I would like your help with listening to that. But it's not that I even have an agenda. I'm just trying to understand the film's agenda.
Right.
and let that influence all the decisions moving forward. I mean, this is just like a filmmaking thing in general, but communication and like relationships, whether it's personal or
every
film.
area. Yeah.
You get like communication so good. Trying to keep that flowing, keep that open, making sure people feel safe, secure, taken care of, considered. These are the things that when those start to fall away, that's when some resentment or bitterness or some block starts to happen that can lead to these arguments. When everyone's trusting and loving each other, then there's no reason to argue, because we're all just here to support each other.
Yeah, I love how often that comes up on the show with whoever I'm interviewing, like makeup or special effects, or like it always is like, oh, it's not about me, you know. And it's like it's such a funny thing, because I think, you know, we all have this perception, I think, of the artist who's like, you know, in kind of the Kubrick aura, which is like, I'm running this thing, you know, like we picture that. And the best projects or the best crews seem to be the ones where it's in service of, I mean, who would have guessed the project, you know, and not ego. And it's huge. And that's another thing I have to, you know, it comes back to who you surround yourself with too. Because that's one of the things, like, you know, when you're watching an independent film, like there are common traps, I think, that you always see these projects go into, which is one I mentioned is they try to over exceed their, you know, the abilities or the budget or the schedule. And the other piece that really I kept thinking about throughout the movie was like acting, you know, like acting can derail projects. You know, we've all seen the indie film with a great concept and a bad cast. And I was watching going like, this is an incredible cast of people. And so you have this group of people who you can trust to say like, okay, take this idea and deliver it the way you think your character would. Were these all pre-existing friends, or were any of these like new connections where, you know, welcome to the group, let's make this happen?
They were all like pre-existing friends except for Ashley Denise Robinson, who plays Jethica. She was a friend of a friend. She came recommended through Danny Madden. She had worked on some projects with this production company, Vanishing Angle, that had produced Danny's feature Beast, that Will, who plays Kevin, Axon, and I was one editor on that film. So it's all very much, you know, wasn't a person I personally knew, but was, you know, within this relatively within the circle. But no one knew each other. They all knew me, but they weren't friends with each other until this project. Yeah.
That's cool. So I want to talk just a little bit story-wise. So you mentioned, and we can navigate into spoilers a little bit here, because if you're this far in, like, watch the movie. Okay, that's your spoiler warning. But I am curious to know, like, you talk about the stalking angle, which is obviously, I think, the hook of the movie. It's like this idea that even in death, like, this person's still following me around. It's a really scary and unsettling thing. And it's my favorite moment in the movie is in the trailer where you just start hearing him yelling her name. And I'm like, that's so creepy and disturbing. He's just standing outside walking around. Did you have any thoughts toward like pushing that angle to make it a darker tone? Because the movie obviously I think is dark in a lot of ways, but it never goes into like full horror. Like I was wondering if it was going to dip full horror or if it was going to go like more comedic, but it navigates this very just realistic, like you're observing this happening. Did you have any thoughts as far as like pushing more of a horror angle with that perspective, considering that's kind of a scary situation they find themselves in?
I mean, when I think about making something and putting it out into the world, I like to think that it's contributing to make the world more like a world I would want to live in. And trauma, I think, is one of, at least in the West anyways, a really big issue we have, and how we deal with trauma. And there are cycles of trauma, and I think collectively we're quite confused about it and what to do about it, and it leads to lots of problems on all sides of these situations. And with movies, when we're showing violent stuff, it's potentially just resetting the trauma, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it just, like, awareness. If you go to therapy, if you're in therapy, if you understand therapy, it's like once you have awareness about it, about anything, that's the beginning, and then the rest sort of follows after that. So like to be aware about what we're putting out and what we're showing, what we're choosing to show on screen, to see, and like, to really see a movie about a woman getting stalked. I don't personally need to really like see or want to see that really good actor acting scared. Like, I know that exists. I don't want to necessarily give ideas to somebody who might be imbalanced for like, what are some ways to stalk? Like it's like the way like we put ideas out into the universe, like it can hurt, you know? And so I'd like I want to be and try to be very aware about these topics that are worth exploring. They shouldn't not be talked about, but like how to talk about it. So with stalking, knowing that this is very real, the idea that like you're being stalked after death by your stalker
Yeah.
is not even fake. That's what a woman experience, a person who's been stalked experiences, because they're forever traumatized basically for the rest of their life. That their stalker, and Will did a bunch of research and I did research, meaning I listened to podcasts about stalking, I read articles, I did some work, some very striking, poignant things about how their stalker can get arrested and get sent into jail, but they still don't feel free of it.
Yeah.
They still live with it. They still look over their shoulder. They know the moment that person gets out of jail, they're probably coming back
Right.
and like continuing. So like this idea that you can't stop them even in death is not even supernatural. It's like
Yeah.
that's what a person experiences. So I'm thinking about those things and I'm thinking like this is a challenge in the world. I also like to try to have empathy for all people. And all these thoughts just kind of like lead to me not wanting to exploit this topic at all, but still wanting to understand it better, which is like
Yeah.
what making art or something is going to be.
Yeah.
And what was exciting as I'm like trying to unpack and detangle what the story is going to be is kind of coming up with the rules of the ghost, understanding that this ghost is not actually going to be dangerous, meaning like he can't touch you, he can't
Yeah.
come inside, he's like the
He's not
wimpiest.
knocking picture frames off the wall.
Yeah.
And
He's
all
like,
that
there's
stuff.
no like ghost like we are because I'm setting the rules of my ghost movie, and like we're gonna make it so this ghost actually can't really do anything. Certainly, there's still psychological power that he is able to exude, which again is sort of a parallel to the experiences of like real life stalkers, and by kind of like taking the fangs out of this monster, we're then able to explore it in a way that to me anyways doesn't feel necessarily, again, like exploitive,
Right.
necessarily like adding to, like I don't need to see a woman running and away and getting
Yeah.
chased. It's like we know that exists. What more can we understand from this? So this is like why I was always kind of choosing to not steer down the path of like, let's make a scary horror movie and watch what it's like to scare a woman. I was like, I'd rather go a
That's
different
never
direction.
been done though. We've never seen that happen. No.
Right. But that's like why I'm like, I feel like I would be more interested in something that examines this topic in a way I necessarily hadn't really seen before. I probably have. It's probably been done. Everything's been done, but this at least felt fresh to me.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I like that it's a lot of I know it's New Mexico, so of course that visual like we think Breaking Bad, like that, like it's just so when you see that landscape, you think about it. But what the other thing is just like the camera just rests and lets you take in a moment, standing out in this field, like looking at each other, like those moments where like you said, it's all psychological. It's all in the background. On a further step with that, one thing I was curious about was Kevin doesn't really have necessarily a comeuppance, aside from dying initially. It's kind of a big
death.
aside from death, but in the afterlife, you kind of you mentioned religion very briefly, but I'm curious, like when you're saying the rules for this, looking at the afterlife, how did you think about any potential eternal destination for Kevin or some comeuppance afterwards? Because that's the only piece for me. Like when I was watching the movie, is like I was like waiting because I was like, what's gonna be, because with ghost stories, there's always that resolution moment, right? Where it's either they are punished or they find what they were looking for, and they, bright lights ensue, and they whatever that is. But the movie really ends with Kevin kind of just wandering, with his newfound friend Benny, which poor Benny. But tell me a little bit about that, like that arc for him, and did you consider any alternate options or him taking the separate path?
Yeah, I mean, I generally tried to find empathy for all humans, all characters, and to not judge, try to understand.
Yeah.
So like the idea of this is like it's real shit we're talking about. Like
Yeah.
people do get stalked. It is terrible. It is usually there's mental health issues usually involved.
Yeah.
Women, like, when their lives are destroyed, it's like a terrible thing, and bad things happen in the world. But think do I think Kevin should go to hell? Like, first off, do I believe in hell? No. But do I think he should like really go to hell, eternal punishment for these bad things he's done that are probably a product of other trauma that he had experienced? And like, again, like this like cycle of trauma thing is where I always kind of go to. So the idea that he needs to be further punished beyond death, I don't like.
Yeah.
Like, he's dead. It's over. He doesn't get
Yeah.
to live the rest of his life. That is his punishment.
Right.
And the idea that death could change you, that's what allows him to finally find empathy for this person who he had caused so much trauma to, I think is nice and beautiful. And if we are allowed that and within our souls, then there's hope for all of us.
Yeah.
So for me, that's how I approached it. For Ashley, and in a way that I think is very good, especially for actors, they very much like identify with their characters, and have their beliefs sort of align with what their characters have. We're also, the way we made this movie is like shooting chronologically, like
Oh,
just
really?
so like they're in character. They're not like method, but they're living with the character, just kind of like staying, in the beats moving forward. And so as we're kind of like figuring out what the ending was, Ashley very much was like, Kevin can't get away with this. Like, he needs to have like learned a lesson. This is before we kind of realized that death could change him, because we're trying to figure out like, okay, how do we get rid of this ghost? How do you get rid of a stalker? And it's kind of impossible. That's the problem. Is
Yeah.
like the mental imbalance leads to like no rationality around it. And so she was very much of the camp of like she probably would have sent him to hell. Like, not Ashley, but like
Her character.
Jessica would have,
Yeah.
Jessica felt like, this guy has ruined my life, and I need to be free of that. And if that means he has to go to hell, then good riddance. So like that kind of, I guess conflict within the writing team, a healthy conflict, allowed us to arrive at a conclusion that I at least enjoy, that kind of satisfies multiple angles without being didactic about, this is the way anything is. And what happens after the afterlife, that's way more fun to like not answer.
Yeah.
At least in this movie. I think it could be fun to be like, let's rejoin Kevin and Benny and see where
Yeah.
else they might go. What other realms of existence are there?
Yeah.
But there's not an end. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was curious the approach on that, because and that's why I like these conversations, because like you have, and we are all so informed by whatever our background is, or just movies that we watch. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things. Like I mentioned, some of the darker angles things could go, or some of the things that you expect cinematically, but like a lot of those you expect, but like if they happen, you go like, oh, it's the same. You know what I mean? Like I mentioned, like the end of the movie, like I expected this either really strong comeuppance, like it sounds like Jessica, the character, would be rooting for,
right.
Or I expected him to like find forgiveness and healing, and there be the bright lights. Either one of those would have felt weird,
right,
but expected. You know what I mean? So there's like that. There's that weird back and forth. But also too, I grew up. I'm not now, but I grew up very religious. So like, there's always, when anything that deals with the afterlife, or I have those preconceived, even now, where I'm like, there's going to be this visual, there's going to be this moment, there's going to be this judgment moment, for this character, which is, it's so interesting how that comes up in the smallest of ways. But yeah, I'm curious as well, like just going through and working on these projects. So now you've done, I want to say five movies.
Jethica is my third narrative feature. I had done kind of like a hybrid doc prior first, and I've done another feature that's not out yet that I did last year with the same kind of like
group.
small movie approach. Yeah.
What do you prefer working? Do you prefer the fictional route, or do you prefer more the docu style?
I very much prefer the narrative, the like plain make believe, Mr. Rogers. That first hybrid doc was very much out of just the like uncontrollable drive to make a movie, no matter like like whatever it is. Like I'll put myself in it, it just needs to, I just need to create a movie and get this ball rolling. But very much the like spirit of it is being a 15-year-old playing make believe with your friends and a video camera, and trying to make each other laugh, or seeing what fun ideas you can come up with together.
Definitely. I want to move us here toward a couple conversation starters that I have with a lot of guests, but I want to ask too, like, you're obviously very comfortable in this realm where you can grab some friends and go shoot something, which I think that's kind of the way things are moving anyway. Like there's a lot of independent creation and things like that. Do you have interest in going into like, hey, here's a huge budget with a large, 100-person crew, and we're going to go make something? Or is that something where you go, it would lose too much of what makes these projects special? I like this realm.
I mean, the main thing for me is to make as opposed to not make. And the thing that I have also experienced, but lots of people experience, is where they are trying to do this big thing and it leads to a lot of waiting and not a lot of making. So the size of it is not what I immediately like think about as far as like, is this something I'm interested in doing or not? I know some people say, or for whatever reason, they like their ideas are too big, and they're like, and if I can't do it big, then I don't want to do it at all. Not that at all. I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
It can be even smaller than these movies, as long as I'm making something with some people I care about. Then I'm checking the most important box. And I had made my first narrative feature was called Everything Beautiful is Far Away. And it wasn't made this small. It's still made small, but it was like a $200,000 budget type, low budget movie. And even that experience wasn't quite as fun as making videos with my friends when I was 15. And for me, again, like that's why I'm doing it. So these most recent movies have been made very much with the spirit of like, do it like you did when you were 15. And I've learned a lot, and it's added a lot of confidence just within myself about what can be done with nothing. That the idea of bringing those lessons to like back to the machine, back to the bigger thing is interesting. I would be interesting to see how they apply, almost as like a bigger experiment. Like it might not work, and I'd be like, yeah, it didn't work. But I am interested to see if I could hold on to the truths that I've learned from these small types of making about what matters and what doesn't, and apply that to the bigger organism.
I'm always fascinated by that. Like I'm a huge fan of George Romero, who like I think I've kind of like anybody else you've named. It's just, if you like film and you like independent, I mean, his name comes up a ton. And like I'm always fascinated seeing him with like a big budget and a smaller budget. And like I think, at least for me, like I look at his movies and I go like, it's like the smaller budget ones felt more like him, versus getting more cooks in the kitchen. But
I wouldn't be surprised if I have that same feeling towards my own things, where if I did something bigger, I'd be like, it doesn't kind of have that magic. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend where we were talking about when like the demo version of a song is like better than the studio
so much
version.
better,
And it's like, and why? Just because it has that special hand, like the special magic that you just you can't recreate. You either captured it in the bottle when you did it, but that was the magic. So
Yeah, and seeing the seams, like seeing the
Mhm.
seams can be magical too. Like it
Mhm.
is fun. Like it's fun using George Romero. Like it's fun seeing him play with Land of the Dead and getting like, oh,
Yeah.
let's blow up this building. Like let's
Right,
go
right, right.
crazy with this money that we have now. But it's like it is fun to be able to see the seams and how it was put together. And like I think for me, like I enjoy seeing those seams and kind of following in my mind like how it was put together. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was curious to hear your thought on that. And I love the thought of creating for the sake of creating. Like that's
Mm.
something. Literally last week we were getting ready to shoot something, and I was literally in the middle of getting things together for the shoot, and I was sitting there going, like, man, I wish I was working on like a big or like
Mm.
this. And then like I'm sitting there going like, oh, back to getting equipment together, and I'm like, I'm shooting something literally in a
Yeah.
few days with people that I like. Like
Right.
I would never have thought I could do this as a kid. So it's like
Yeah.
it's grass is always greener, I guess, in some of those
Mhm.
areas. But
Mhm.
look, I ask some of these questions to everybody that comes on the show. I want to get your thought on all of these. And I
Great.
always move this segment further and further up because people get stumped and take a while to think through these. First and foremost, what is a movie that people would be surprised to know that you enjoy?
Oh, interesting. Um, Surprised that I enjoy. I really enjoy uh My Best Friend's Wedding.
Hmm.
Um, is that surprising? Everyone likes that movie, right?
I mean, I feel like a good rom-com is enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
always. so,
Mm-hmm.
so, um, yeah, that's a good, but it is, I mean, I don't know, is it?
Julia Roberts in her prime. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
what's not to love there?
what do you think is the best decade of film history? This is a hotly debated topic. Um, and everybody's got their weird takes on
Hmm.
this. Um, Tarantino hates the 80s, but that's probably the most frequent answer I get because so many great movies came out in the 80s. What would you say?
Well, I'm not going to be that strongly opinionated about this. Um, but what didn't like Wizard of Oz come out in like 41 or something?
It's late 30s or early 40s.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Let me
Man, and then
check.
like Kurosawa made so many good movies in the 50s. Hmm, Probably the 90s.
Okay. Okay. When did Wizard of Oz come out? Okay, Kurosawa was great in the 90s, like so what
Yeah, yeah.
when you think 90s, what appeals to you about that decade?
It's purely personal. It's purely that's when I was a teenager. That's when I was going through puberty. That's when I saw uh The Matrix and Jurassic Park and went to the movies a lot. So for me, that's going to be my favorite decade.
That'll do it. That'll do it. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
Ugh, this is a disgusting question. I would remake nothing. Nothing needs to be get remade. Make something new.
Which of your projects do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
Isn't this the same as trying to ask somebody like what's their favorite movie? And that's like asking somebody what their favorite
Who's your favorite kid?
kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
um
I have one kid, so I'm forever okay on that
right,
question.
right. Hmm. Say the question one more time so I can get really specific about what you're asking.
Which of your projects do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
I'm gonna go with Jethica because it's fresh. And because I do think um it very much contains the spirit with which I like to make, um, which is a little dangerous, a little risky, but very idea driven, intentional, and collaborative, and
Gotcha.
with like a strange sense of humor.
Yeah. Like it. Like it. I have two more questions. The next one is, who do you think, I almost said it French. Who do you think the most underrated filmmaker is working right now? It's a really easy softball question I like to throw in there.
Yeah. Underrated. It's tricky because if you so you either pick somebody who isn't that well known, because if they're well known, it means they're rated maybe kind of higher, or somebody that is rated kind of high, but you think
Should be higher.
is even higher. My I'm gonna go with a friend of mine, whose name is Albert Burney, who is co-director of Strawberry Mansion, which is this movie that played Sundance 2021. And it's his third movie. He also makes this incredible animated series and films called Tux and Fanny that feel like the lost Saturday morning cartoons from Russia from like the 80s.
That's a pitch right there.
And then he also turned that series into a video game that is an incredible video game to play. And the way in which he creates, he just is such a wonderful, beautiful mind and artist that I love very much and feel like more people could also love as they discover him.
Yeah.
And the things he makes, because they're all like special and worthwhile.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I ask questions. Like I love getting to find out those little gems or those projects or people that are need to be seen more. So I'm excited to check him out. The very last question I'm going to ask you, and you've given a lot of good advice so far, but what's the number one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring filmmaker who's listening to this? No pressure. This could change someone's life. Go ahead.
I mean, we know that this is a question that we ask ourselves, we ask each other, people get asked. And so often an answer I hear people say a lot, and I've said, it's like, you just have to get out there and make something. Which isn't not true. Like, that is the truth. I think a thing I like to add to that is, and what I kind of think is cool about the way I'm making these movies is, like, there's so little you actually need. All the things you think you need, you actually don't. To make a movie, you don't need a sound guy. You don't need a good camera. You don't need a script. There's like so many things you don't actually need. And so to like let go of those things can sometimes remove those hurdles that make it hard to just go out and make something. And then the other thing that I know you're asking, like, what's the one thing, but these are all kind of like caveats to, you got to just go make something. Because initiative is the thing that separates the people who do and the people who don't. But the other thing that I think really helps is if you're able to very clearly identify and understand why you're doing it, what you're wanting from it. And to distill that to a single thing is really powerful and really will allow you to make more decisions quicker and more strongly and definitively. Whether you're literally like, I want to make money. If you fucking know that and you are honest with yourself and that's what you want to do, make decisions based on that. You're going to let go of so many other things, and you're going to come at it with, like like a sharpened blade. But if you're also like, that's not actually what's important. What's important is that I express this one idea that I have, and it's like really important to you. Then make decisions based on that, and you're going to let go of all the other things. Often for me, it's like, I want to make something with some friends. And so all the other things I'm ready to let go of. They don't all have to get let go of, but you kind of have to
Right.
be ready to do that. And I
Right.
think if you're really able, and it's hard to be honest with yourself, it's hard to know yourself. This is our eternal quest. But if you're able to identify that and put some time into thinking about that and letting that really refine your decisions, you will get to where you're going probably quicker and also with more integrity and you might even enjoy the journey even more
Yeah.
and suffer a little less.
No, which is the goal, right?
That's the
Enjoy
goal.
a little bit more, suffer a little bit less. Yeah,
Yes.
that's something for the last year I've just really thought about is like we always ask, as kids we were all asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my pushback now is always like, who do you want to be? Like, what do you want out of life? And then the what's going to change. Like, podcasting didn't exist when I was in kindergarten. I could have been like, I want to be a podcaster,
Do you think there's any kids out there like right now?
Now, yeah,
kindergarten
for
being
sure.
like, when I grow up, I want to be a podcaster.
My daughter's 5 and she's already like, she'll be walking around like with a fake microphone, going like, welcome to my show. It's like,
so cool.
but in 20 years, like it'll be different. Like there'll be things that are available and ways to express that creativity that are so different. And look, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm excited to see what you do next and the projects you do, and really enjoyed Jethica. Like there's so many, like again, like there's so many films that just like I mean, I just want people to see, and like this is one where it's really unique and really interesting. And again, like what it doesn't do is make the mistakes I see so many movies like take that have tried to do these same themes or try to cover the same material. And I just love that you give us kind of this slice of life movie, but it's genre, but it's there's a lot of layers to it. So I'm excited to see what you do next. I'm excited to see what sandbox you choose to play in next, and really hope people check it out. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anywhere else you want people to connect with you, or just go watch the movie and watch the next one after that? I
mean, I will say, kind of going back to this idea of initiative, I mean, I have always had good initiative, I would say. But like the email address on my website goes to me. I am on Instagram. I'm very accessible to write to. I often say this if I meet somebody at a film festival and they're like, oh yeah, I would love to ask you some more questions or something. I'm like, email me. So often they don't.
Yeah.
So often they don't actually take that step for, whatever hurdle it is, whatever fear or whatever. But I just say, I'm there. I'm not really hiding. If you want to reach out and ask a question, I will probably respond. And just by Googling my name, it's all very findable on the internet. Jethica will be on Fandor, and I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening. Be sure to check out Jethica as soon as it comes out. You're not going to regret it. And that's it for today's show.
Thanks so much.